everyone and welcome back to another episode of Rift News, the show you can finally watch since all your exams are now finished. Throughout the last week not a lot has happened, but bigger and more impactful events arrived. So today will be more about going through what Riot's members said about the state of League of Legends. So let's start with what happened to Clash. Clash generated much more hype than I thought it would, and to be honest I am super happy about it. Clash might become the next big deal for the players, because normal games can get old, and even ranked games won't feel so special after you played 1,000 of them. Clash on the other hand brings in a new wave of excitement. You suddenly don't play for the sake of showing off your rank, you play in order to get better team icons, get instant rewards after each tournament, and those sweet trophies to show off on Summoner's Rift. But Clash is really good at reviving the feeling of playing for the fun of playing. Especially since you have to play with your friends. The launch of Clash was a big deal to Riot. They hosted multiple IRL events around the world. One such Clash event happened in London. And Riot also released the official Clash trailer, a humorous take on what Clash is like. I don't know why, but out of all of the IRL trailers for Riot's events, this is my favorite.
Don't feed.
But of course, you probably now know that Clash didn't turn out the way Riot hoped it would. It all began with the Oceanic servers. The OCE players were the first to play Clash. Ben Forbes, a member of Riot's Clash team that is seriously passionate about Clash, even gave us the first graphs of locked-in teams. But it seems like the system wasn't ready to handle so much hype. It's quite possible that because of its own success, Clash had crashed. They weren't able to get the servers to keep up with all the teams, and ultimately OCE Clash had to be delayed until the next day. However, a few hours later, Europeans woke up and they started locking in their Clash teams. And they too were surprised by games not launching, getting stuck on picks and bans, or never getting assigned to a tournament. The servers couldn't handle it. But then the next day for OCE was on its way, and the issue continued. So in the end, Riot had to cancel the first ever Clash weekend. And to prevent more harm, they also cancelled the Clash for US servers. In the end, Riot Shalkar gave us this post. Hey all, when we began launching Clash last night in Asia, we immediately saw critical technical issues on all servers except a handful. This issue hadn't been seen in any of our prior beta testing, and we are cancelling Clash's opening weekend in all remaining parts of the world. The team's been solely focused on finding a solution to get Clash back on track. And we are extremely conscious that many of you planned your weekends around Clash, and we're deeply sorry to have blown up your plans at the last minute. You'll get any spent Clash tickets back. Also, there will likely be Clash tests in certain regions around the world as we explore fixes, but Clash Weekend 1 is officially cancelled here in EU West. Similar posts later appeared for all other servers as well. This was followed up on the next day with a post by Riot Amwarlus. Hey all, obviously Clash's opening weekend was a bust. This is in no way a one-for-one replacement, but we are turning on all random Earth globally for the rest of the weekend. We realize this isn't the same sort of competitive experience that you were expecting this weekend, but we wanted to offer something in the interim that we could quickly hotfix up to a playable standard, while we work out our next steps for the players affected by Clash's cancellation. As all random Earth is one of our most requested modes, we hope this will bring some respite to an otherwise rough weekend. To be clear, working out what caused Clash to fail and how we are going to fix it is our main priority. We are not done with the discussion yet, and we're waging options on next steps for affected players. Heads up, there are likely going to be bugs and some weird interactions as we haven't had a huge amount of time to test on this patch, so we might be disabling some runes and champs pretty early on. We'll have more information regarding the next steps for Clash in the coming days. And this is absolutely true. Riot had to basically enable all random Earth overnight, and they have never tested Earth's interactions with the new runes before. So just the fact that all random Earth works properly is a miracle done on Riot's part. And because of Ben Forbes, we even know who to thank. I seriously wanna shout out Just Sephiroth, Riot Embo, Riot Nakail, Riot Avari, Riot Aurum, Riot Maple, and a ton of other Riots for pulling this off in a super short time frame. Some of these folks have been up working on Clash and all random Earth, enabling it for nearly 48 hours, so please be gentle. So, we now know that Riot will test Clash on some servers in order to find fixes for their issues. But right now, we don't know when will Clash officially come back in its full glory. Besides Clash, before all of this happened, there was a post that went somewhat viral in the League of Legends community. There was a general complaint post by Speedweep titled, "For once, let's blame Ghostcrawler for something he's actually responsible for." In the post, Speedweep talked about the direction of the game. How letting one player snowball and win the game is getting too far away from what League of Legends used to be. Which, by the way, is objectively false, and I can prove that. But more importantly, he held Ghostcrawler accountable for the majority of the game's balance. There are some very interesting points, and some other points that contradict with what Speedweep's goal is here. So I understand that the community was pretty much split about this. For example, I agree with this statement. In current day, you are not supposed to win as a team, but to have this one strong player you get really pumped up, and he just steamrolls the rest. The favor assassins gain from the balance team is further proof of that. They get ahead a little and suddenly the entire game revolves around them. That is right. But that doesn't check with what he later says about Ghostcrawler. But the vision he has for the game is just vastly different from what the game originally was supposed to be, and what made it successful in the first place. See, that is not true. In Season 2 and 3, when the game had its biggest spike in player base, the game was all about snowballing. When someone says Season 2, the majority of players remember better nerf Irelia, because Irelia, Riven and Jax could simply carry everyone. But obviously without reading the entire post you won't get the full context, so take everything here with a pinch of salt. The part that I want to read, however, is Ghostcrawler's response to this. It holds some valuable information about how Riot works. Sure, I'll give you a red response on this. You guys still seem to make a lot of assumptions about how we work. The League organization is really big. It is big partially because we are our own publisher, and partially just because it's a big game with a lot of moving parts. Our organizational structure is to have a lot of smaller teams focused on specific problem spaces. For example, the live team makes the patch-to-patch balance changes, and overall focuses on problems like game health, fairness and frustration. There is a different team that works to improve matchmaking, and another that builds new game modes. In that environment, it's not any one person's job to go around and say, "Hey, I have this personal value, so you need to start implementing the game in this particular way." If I left the team tomorrow and another designer took my place, it would be really hard to detect any differences from the viewpoint of a player. What you see are Riot values and League values, not my values. I have also personally been focusing a lot lately on features like new player overhaul and Clash, and some things we haven't talked about. So if anything, I'm a little out of touch with recent gameplay changes. But that's fine, because I have very capable leads like Meddler who do keep in touch with that part of the game. Like I said, large organization. All of that said, I am fine with you blaming me for anything in the game that you find annoying or just don't like. But that's not because I go down to the champion pit and tell them to design champions to fulfill a particular vision. Maybe I've been focused on the wrong things in the short term. Or maybe our high-level philosophy isn't being acted upon. Or maybe we just have the wrong designers working on the wrong problems in some places. All of those things are also my problems to solve. To address some of the other points, we've heard a lot of feedback from players that we have shifted the game too far from the solo carry potential to team coordination mattering too much. It's something we are working to change. The jungle changes were not made to shift power to a particular subset of junglers. They were overall made because we were concerned that junglers had too much effect on the outcome of the early game, and we wanted to slow that first gank down just a little bit. That is oversimplifying a lot, but that's the basic idea. Systemic changes like this can definitely impact individual champions, and we shake those out over time. If the goal had been to just buff duelist type junglers, we would have just said that and could have enacted it much more simply. It is a constant struggle for us to decide what to change without changing too much. I am 100% certain that players would get bored and move away from the game if we just decided to stop trying to improve it over time. And we want to create a game that is around for years or decades. We know there is a cost to any change we make to League. There's a cost if you have to relearn something. There's a cost if you don't like a change we made. We understand that, and we try to only make changes that leave the game in a better state than it was before. But we definitely take steps back in order to take steps forward from time to time. All of our changes have goals though, and if the goals are unclear, and I think they were for the jungle changes mentioned above, then that's a communication failure on our part. At least then you can challenge whether you disagree with the goals, or whether you agree with the goals and just disagree that the specific implementation will deliver on them. Overall, I am concerned that we put a lot of different things into new and updated champion kits these days. It is done with the noble purpose of making sure that you guys get excited about new champions. But it does mean a lot of our newer offerings are much more complicated than our older champions. We need to get better about being happier and making sure you guys are happy, with some champions with relatively simple kits, with maybe 1 or 2 complex abilities instead of the 4, 5 if you count the passive, requiring a lot of information to play around. I often wonder how well a Lux or Jinx would do today if they were new champions. On the other hand, I don't think the mobility arms race, or shield arms race, or ranged arms race is as bad as players sometimes like to argue. Very mobile champions can still have sharp weaknesses. It's harder for champs who can do everything really well to have sharp weaknesses. But usually this just manifests as their strengths not ending up all that sharp. Because at the end of the day, even a wildly unbalanced champion tends to have a win rate in the 50%. So I really think what players are talking about here is the frustration it can take to shut down an enemy champ, not that they can't win a game against that champ. This is why some of the strongest complaints still come in about champions with strong duel potential, the Rivens, Zeds and Yasuos. Their win rates may not be all that awesome, but it can be frustrating when they catch you alone one-on-one. But I don't think in that case the answer is just to make sure their win rates are low. It also gets into the whole conundrum of how to give players more individual agency when some of the champions designed with a lot of individual agency are some of the most frustrating and most complained about. Ghostcrawler later quotes a part of the post. I mean, when you look at Ghostcrawler's history before WoW, he has mostly worked on RTS titles. He started with Age of Empires after all. Back in the time, no one was playing these games for competitive multiplayer. People played the campaign, and the multiplayer was for you and your friends to mess around with during LAN parties. For what it's worth, we playtested Age of Empires almost exclusively in 4v4 multiplayer LAN games. The ridiculous thing about game development back then was that was pretty much all we had. We had no way to gather actual data from players, so we had to balance the whole thing ourselves, with the kind of results you'd expect. Nowadays you can gather tons and tons of data about the actual player experience. I designed most of the campaigns for the Age of Empire games, but they didn't get a ton of playtesting. Almost all of our playtesting was multiplayer. It's amazing the games ended up as good as they did. Another quote. You don't need to play the game in order to design it. Look, the people who build airplanes rarely pilot them, but they still have a pretty good idea of how one flies a plane. That's all I was saying. That quote, taken out of context as these things sometimes are, was a response to the persistent yet somewhat starred theory that the best players should be the ones to design competitive games. There are some players who are excellent designers, and we hire some of them. And there are other players who would be dreadful at the job. If you don't play the game you design, it will definitely be much harder for you to be effective. But yes, in a theoretical sense, it is possible. And the last quote, the problem with Ghostcrawler is that he thinks he knows more than what he does. Nah, you always want to be in the situation where you're the dumbest person in the room. And fortunately, that's pretty easy for me at Riot. The problem with Ghostcrawler is that he has less time to talk to players than he used to, and struggles to find the right format these days. Okay, that was a pretty long answer, but what did I miss that you were really hoping for an answer to? That was the full answer by Ghostcrawler. And let's be honest, he's totally right that some people still don't realize that Riot has entire teams of people deciding on the changes. And people also don't know that Riot forces their employees to play the game. This is something we know because of the very old documentary on how Riot games came to be. Now, let's have a look at 2 different gameplay thoughts by Riot Meddler. One from the 23rd of May and one from the 25th. As it is always with Meddler, there is a disclaimer that everything you're about to hear is still being worked on, and nothing is guaranteed to go live. So just be happy that Riot is sharing what they are working on with us. In the first post, Meddler mentioned 2 very important things about junglers. The first one addressed the Scuttle Crab changes. One of our goals was to make Scuttle more of a focus for attention, by giving it around the same amount of XP and gold as a regular camp. Starts a bit lower, scales harder, some ballpark though. We think that the value per schedule is now in an appropriate place, but that the combination of that increased value with the current respawn timer results in scuttle control influencing a bit too much of a jungler's time. We're reducing scuttle respawn rate as a result, 2 minutes 30 seconds instead of 2 minutes 15 seconds. Then increasing scuttle shrine duration to keep similar total shrine availability time, from 75 seconds to 90 seconds. The other important part was about jungler XP and gold over time. Since they are reducing jungler XP early on and nerfing their early game impact in the meantime, they need to compensate for it. These graphs show their XP and gold compared to the previous patch. You can see that the levels in the early game go slower, but they increase in speed over time. Their gold, however, will go down overall, and this also happens to other lanes, so don't get scared. A bonus thing in this post is a new cursor. Has been testing pretty well. We'll get it onto PBE in a couple of weeks or so to start gathering wider feedback. Since it will still be a work in progress, some things may be rough or experimental still. E.g., we'll probably still be trying different approaches for how the cursor reacts when you mouse over an enemy target. In the second post, Meddler mentioned that the patch 8.12 will be focused on gifted shields, especially the timing. Riot may nerf the duration of shields to make people make use of them in a shorter window. Later, Meddler also said that Riot will try to put less time into champions that have big impact on teamfights in the future, especially Ryze, Azir and Kalista, so that they can focus on other champions as well. However, in order to achieve this, Riot will have to work on them now, just so they don't even have to look at them in the future. And that's pretty much all the bigger things that happened last week. The Ghostcrawler response probably took the most time, but it was also very interesting. But that's gonna be it for this video. So if you enjoyed it, feel free to like it and subscribe for more lore and news. Also, there's the bell button, which I've never asked you to ring, but YouTube is very weird with their subscription page, so maybe it's a good idea to click on it. If you'd like to chat, our social media, Twitch, merch and P.O.Box will be in the description. Of course, massive shout out to our patrons for going the extra mile, you guys are awesome. And with that, thank you all so much for being here and for your support, you know I really appreciate it. And as always, thank you come again.